Everyone. It's very nice, if somewhat strange, to be with you. I'm really looking forward to meeting the group when we have an in-person or in Zoom chat. I want to thank Jane and Kim for the invitation. And I'm going to read, which I have not been doing this last year, but I want to cover a good bit of ground and take you through some slides while you listen. Also, this is very much a work in progress, very early days. So when we talk, don't hold back. I'll look forward to hearing your views. Okay, I'm going to share the screen and we'll see if we can make this work. We seem to see them everywhere now. The web muse barks, growls, and hisses with alleged evidence of interspecies attachment. One of the first unexpected pairings to take social media by storm was the 130-year-old Aldabra tortoise Maisie and a young hippopotamus named Owen. After being separated from his herd in the tsunami of 2004, Owen landed in the Haller Park Animal Sanctuary in Kenya. There he attached himself to the tortoise, and they were inseparable until 2006, when Owen's size became a threat to Maisie, and so Owen was moved in with another rescued hippopotamus named Cleo. Their strange and to many sweetly miraculous pairing has been the subject of children's books, documentaries, and YouTube videos. You can see these book covers pick up on that same theme. They started their own flood of interspecies memes. For example, as I say in these book covers, by a series of books by Jennifer Holland, a contributing writer for National Geographic, who rode this wave to a series of bestsellers, beginning with her 2011 book, Unlikely Friendships, 50 Remarkable Stories from the Animal Kingdom. One of the thousands of photographs shared in the years after Owen and Maisie appeared was this image of a rhesus macaw and a ring-tailed dove taken in 2007. This was in the Nalinding Island Fushan National Nature Preserve, where these two beings, remained together for 2 months. This photo became the cover of Holland's first book, and Amazon reviews and many Facebook fans who delight in these representations of animal friendships read the book's cover through a disturbingly sentimental lens, despite a growing body of work by researchers like Franz de Waal, Barbara King, Mark Bekoff, and our own Jane Desmond on animal emotions and cognition. In the cover photograph, the young macaw rhesus monkey clings to a dove. What do we make of the expression on the small, near-human face as it attempts to grip a species so unlike itself and its actual mother? The dove is so non-mammalian in its features and shape that the monkey's stance seems more indicative of fear and abandonment than pleasure. As a National Reserve staff member succinctly says in the book, if only the dove had hands to hug him back. Here, as in so many cases recently, images of interspecies attachment with and without humans as one of those species, we see a contradictory argument. Explicitly, we see the, in this case, melancholy adaptation of utterly unlike species to the necessities of physical and psychological survival. Not only would this infant become the prey of another animal on its own and be unable to care for itself, but infants of many species, including human animals, can die from what is called very simply failure to thrive. Many of us long to read images like this as hopeful, that differences in general can be bridged and bonding can happen despite all odds, a version of what Donna Haraway so beautifully describes as knotted entanglements in when species meet, and never more palpable a desire than after the last couple of years. But once I step back from my own animal adoring voyeuristic pleasure, I also see the way that implicitly interspecies memes, even where humans are visible as here, or invisible as here, remind us of what it often costs animals for humans to be near them. Book covers, sorry. The possibility that far more species than humans possess emotions was also a preoccupation in period I tend to work in, the 19th century. Late in his career, Charles Darwin asked whether emotions could cross species lines in his book, The Expression of the Emotions in Man and Animals from 1872. Though there were multiple editions that changed over time, photographs were used in later editions. Drawing upon the etymology of the word emotion, which emphasized physical movement, Darwin ventured that across species lines, emotions could be determined outwardly in the lines of the body. The book took a surprising turn to Lamarck's earlier use inheritance theory, the hypothesis that a repeated habit could become attached to an emotion and then inherited by future generations. Like to test Darwin's theories, you can visit the UC Darwin Correspondence Emotion Experiment to see whether you can correctly guess emotions based on facial expressions. Though Darwin's theory was largely discredited a few years later, the fascination with cross-species emotions lingers. In her magisterial study picturing animals in Britain 1750 to 1850, Diana Donald discusses Darwin's followers, like George Romanes, author of Animal Intelligence, 1882, who continued to argue for cross-species shaping of the emotions. Romanes argued that the psychological character of dogs in particular is, quote, molded by human agency, taking on human characteristics. Like Darwin, Romanes leaned heavily on anecdotes to argue that the result of contact between species led to emotions that crossed species boundaries, or at least the emotions crossed from humans to non-human species. It would be impossible in our time together to trace a thorough history of the evolution of the interspecies meme over time, but at moments in the last 2 centuries, visual and literary representations of the interspecies meme have consistently surfaced in Britain and the US. Today, I'm focusing on visual and literary texts from 19th century Britain and a few from our own historical moment that invite us to consider when and how and why shifting fantasies about interspecies hierarchy, agency, and attachment go viral. On one hand, the images are haunted by complex intertwinings of the desires to love and control and the consequent precarity of non-human animals. More optimistically, on the other hand, the images also sometimes capture a longing to understand instead of to own or control the animal other. Just as Holland put out the call for unlikely friendships, I'm eager to find instances of interspecies interaction in which species, including humans, are being reimagined within larger networks and ecosystems of place, within broad-based environmental studies and with commitment to imaging other species' point of view. Derrida, Haraway, and Barbara Schmitz are examples of people who are attempting to do this. I should also confess to you that I've become increasingly convinced that without awakening empathy, a kind of moral species decentered empathy for animals, even for the earth, and without forming deep attachments to local and global ecosystems and becoming willing citizen advocates for those systems, I fear for our future. These images ask us what love means to us, what good and terrible things we've done to other species in the name of love, and what adaptations we would be willing to make in the service of environmental ethics when that love crosses species lines. Though Charles Darwin's On the Origin of Species from 1859 might seem like the most likely point of departure for a study of interspecies representations in the 19th century, when it comes to popular culture, the Bible may be an even more pervasive influence, especially the King James Bible version of Genesis. Firmly and repeatedly asserting the dominion model of human-animal relationships, Genesis grants man authority over all other species, and I use man advisedly. In 1865, Gustave Doré published a lavishly illustrated Vulgate Bible in France with 160 Old Testament plates and 81 for the New Testament. This family Bible, along with cheaper editions, were published in England soon after. As we see in Doré's engraving from the 1866 Illustrated Bible, the origins of species in Christianity are habitat, earth air, and water, and the movements animals use to navigate. On day 4 of the first biblical account of creation, quote, "The waters bring forth abundantly the moving creature that hath life, and fowl that may fly above the earth in the open firmament of heaven. And God created great whales and every living creature that moveth." Cattle, creeping things, and the beasts of the earth appear on day 5. Later in book 2, God grants the power of naming animals to Adam. Even in this early account of divine order, we see the instability of species hierarchy. After all, the serpent triumphs over Eve. We encounter another flaw in biblical species hierarchy when God speaks to Noah in book 9 after the flood, decreeing that non-human animals will hereafter be effectively alienated from other creatures, quote, "And this fear of you and dread of you shall be upon every beast of the earth and upon every fowl of the air, upon all that moveth upon the earth and upon all the fishes of the sea. Into your hand are they delivered." Emotion, language, and favoritism assert human exceptionalism. On the other hand, God also recognizes animals as legal subjects. The covenant is a promise that God will never again unleash a worldwide devastating flood. Twice he asserts that this covenant is, quote, "between me and you and every living creature." The centuries of interspecies representations that follow struggle to fill this gulf between subjectivity and subjugation of non-human animals. A leap through time to 19th century art and literature provides more recent and, from our point of view, more immediately influential interspecies relationships. But that leap doesn't leave biblical arguments far behind. While animals continue to be used even today as signs rather than subjects, a constellation of developments in the 19th century caused a seismic shift in attitudes toward domestic animals. To quickly catalog a few of these forces, in addition to evolutionary biology, those changes included breeding experiments, the rise of pet culture, the ubiquity of menageries, animal acts in zoos, hunting across the globe for wild game and scientific specimens, which crowded natural history museums with taxidermy, a growing animal welfare movement, and studies of urban sociology and of psychology that encompassed animals as well as humans. In visual and literary culture, interspecies relationships form a contact zone where imperial fantasies of dominion, popularized, simplified, and often garbled versions of the survival of the fittest tropes, sentimentalized domesticity, and biblical narratives of hierarchy meet. If we have video and photo means, the Victorians had Edward Landseer and his paintings, paints, and reproductions. A wildly successful animal painter, sculptor, and illustrator, Landseer was Queen Victoria's favorite and a fixture in Royal Academy exhibitions. This is called The Monarch of the Glen. Reproductions and critical commentary about Landseer's work circulated widely in periodical literature, introducing the larger public to his work. To suggest the diverse ways his paintings influence not necessarily perceptions of, but rather feelings about species and interspecies relationships, I want to show you 2 types of paintings among the many narrative genres represented in his work. First, Landseer was greatly admired for animal portraits like this one, which anticipated fictional animal autobiographies like the 1877 novel Black Beauty that appeared with increasing frequency in the second half of the 19th century. We still recognize many of these paintings thanks to their migration into 20th century advertising. The Monarch of the Glen, an image of a red deer stag painted in 1849 to 51, for the refreshment room of the House of Lords, is an image that was exhibited in London in 1851, 1874, and 1890. We see the stag posed stunningly against craggy mountains, and the portrait has a unique and special status in Scotland. Its afterlife includes advertisements by Challenge Butter, Pear Soap, and Hartford Financial Services in the United States. In 2016, Diageo, a distillery, put the painting up for auction, and the National Galleries of Scotland worked feverishly to raise $4 million a match to the distillery's $4 million for a painting valued at $8 million to secure the painting for Scotland. I mention the painting's recent history because it reminds us that even a solitary portrait of an animal or a solitary actual animal is incapable of escaping interspecies engagement. So overwhelming is human presence in the management, staging, articulation, and situating of species, a reality that our use of animals in art makes especially clear. Another famous example of Landseer portraits is his 1861, The Wild Cattle of Chillingham. And we actually have some of these in Iowa, up in the north part of Iowa. So if you haven't ever seen one, you can, a live version. The painting is a fascinating display of feral domesticity. As Harriet Ritvo points out, even though the Earl of Tankerville, owner of the chief herd of these cattle in Victorian Britain, enclosed these cattle in a park, he insisted on what Ritvo calls the glamour of their wildness. Ritvo also points out that the painting was hung with companion paintings of a stag, doe, and fawn in Chillingham Castle, offering, quote, the complex and layered identification of these imposing cattle with both the ancient wilderness they inhabited and the noble family that owned them. If Darwin and Romanes argued for cross-species emotions, Landseer's portraits argue for animals' dignity as animals. The animal subjects in the paintings engage with us as a different species. In Landseer's portraits, we look at the animals looking at us, and not in a particularly flattering way. As John Berger has argued in Why Look at Animals, that reversed gaze disturbs humans' sense of their exceptionalism, noting that if humans can surprise animals, animals can also surprise humans, Berger writes. Thus, a power is ascribed to the animal comparable with human power, but never coinciding with it. The animal has secrets, which, unlike the secrets of caves, mountains, seas, are specifically addressed to man in the paintings. Jacques Derrida famously discussed the unnerving effect of his cat's gaze later in The Animal That Therefore I Am. The portraits invite reciprocal respect. Standing in front of one of these huge actual paintings might even prompt feelings of humility before the grand animalness of Landseer's animal subjects. The impulse of our species to capture, in myriad senses of that word, the inner being of other species inspired innumerable literary analogues to Landseer's portraits in the 19th century. As I've mentioned, fictional autobiographies are a wonderful condensation of the realist effect that appealed so strongly to Victorian taste. Landseer's portraits pay an almost photographic attention to the surface details that insist upon the specificity of both the individual and the species. But animal portraits, biographies, and autobiographies are equally indebted to another realist influence, the rise of psychology and a growing belief in an interior invisible consciousness. Francis Power Cobb, who fought for animal welfare and an end to vivisection, wrote the book Confessions of a Lost Dog in 1867, so that another species could make a case for itself. The veteran novelist with a fabulously Dickensian name, Gordon Stables, created a canine community in the novel Sable and White, the autobiography of a show collie in 1894. Like Anna Sewell's Black Beauty, the novel uses the autobiographical form to imagine animal consciousness as the dog or horse ages. Humans are crucial but peripheral, standing before portraits that try to translate animal subjectivity into human terms. Writing these fanciful novels off as silly anthropomorphism ignores the reader's pleasure in the animal's animalness. As in the paintings, the most interesting of these novels insist on the unique characteristics of species as essential to character and plot. That animality is even more crucial to narratives in which ordinary animals serve as unknowable others. Think of the abused dog, Bullseye, in Charles Dickens' The Oliver Twist, whose loyalty becomes terrifying when his pack instinct threatens to lead the police to his murderous owner, Bill Sikes. In these instances, the emphasis on the individual being at once romanticizes a particular species and mutes attention to the species as species by focusing on viewers' attention to what I sometimes think of as animal ethics. That is, species-specific qualities of animals that exist somewhere between instinct and a learned code of behavior. The stag stance suggests aloofness, distance, physical power. It stands in not just for deer, but for nature's grandeur, not as an abstraction, but as the beautiful coat, antlers, and nostrils of the deer. The Chillingham cattle are distinctly atypical of their species in remaining wild, yet the portrait alludes to the most conventional human family values. The strong, wary male defends his female mate, his eyes demurely cast down and toward her calf. But rather than imitating humans, I would argue the paintings attract us because they are at least a genuine attempt to portray animals and their animal ethics, which we can only dimly grasp through fantasy. Landseer took over my talk today because he is also a useful pivot for studying changes in cultural uses of interspecies scenes with and without human subjects as one of those species. Nowhere is his interest in cross-species engagement more instructive than in his studies of the American showman, Isaac van Amberg, who lived from 1802 to 1873, whose menagerie fascinated many Victorians, including Queen Victoria. In Isaac van Amberg and His Animals, exhibited at the Royal Academy in 1839, we find the famous lion tamer reclining with his fierce big cats as spectators outside the stage gawk. The painting captures the final tableau of Van Amberg's usual lion performance. Our point of view is from a low angle that sends our gaze up at a magnificent lion sitting sedately above and behind Van Amberg, and a growling tiger whose claws fasten on Van Amberg's leg, even as the showman scratches the tiger's head. Opposite the tiger, a lamb nervously presses against Van Amberg's chest. Leopards and lions surround the highlighted trio of tiger, man, and lamb. The grim, unspoken reality of this intimacy is that most animal trainers in the 1830s and 40s built these relationships through brute conditioning. Van Amberg's stage presence is described in the animal training trade as, quote, working wild, in contrast with the acts that ran animals through a series of obviously learned tricks and postures. He was reputed to subdue the animals with a crowbar during training and to use a whip or stick and gunshots during performances. The young Queen Victoria's description naively captures the dynamic, she says. One can never see it too often in her journal for 29 January 1839. Van Amberg has great power over the animals and they seem to love him, though I think they are in great fear of him. He took them by their paws, throwing them down and making them roar, and he lay upon them after enraging them. The painting asserts the divine justice of this violence through biblical allusions. The lamb invokes Isaiah's prophecy that the return of paradise will be marked by the peaceful coexistence of species led by a little child, turning the animal tamer into an Adamic steward of species. Yet the visual flattening of the hierarchy, most of the beings are piled upon one another on the floor, creates a tense balance of competing forms of power. In this interspecies encounter, the viewer's pleasure comes from the silent struggle between an animal threat of savagery and human bravery and kindness so irresistible that a man can afford to rest indolently among these animals as though his affect alone quells their true natures. The tension is heightened through an allusion to another biblical scene, Daniel and the lions. And you'll forgive me, I'm just so fascinated by these that I have two different images I want to show you. There's another later one by Breton Verviers in 1872. The grim, unspoken reality of this intimacy is that most animal trainers, King Darius is tricked by political shenanigans into throwing Daniel to the lions. To his amazement, Daniel survives. And when he came to the den, he cried with a lamentable voice unto Daniel. And the king spake and said to Daniel, O Daniel, servant of the living God, is thy God, whom thou servest continually, able to deliver thee from the lions? Then said Daniel unto the king, O king, live forever. My God hath sent his angel and hath shut the lions' mouths, that they have not hurt me. For as much as before him innocency was found in me, and also before thee, O king, have I done no hurt. According to Van Amberg's biographer, H. Frost, quote, it was that remarkable and wonderful episode in biblical history found in the 6th chapter of Daniel that induced Mr. Van Amberg to contemplate the possibility of subduing the whole animal kingdom. And while pondering over the escape of Daniel from the lion's den, he conceived that the age of miracles had not expired and at once resolved to solve the problem. The biographer in Van Amberg's show, quote, the lion licked the hand that overcame him and knelt at his conqueror's feet. The leopard fondled as playful as a domestic tabby. The tiger rolled on its sides, while Van Amberg placed his foot on his back and laid the now docile panther between his paws. Now the tableau of the proud king of animal creation. This and many other descriptions of this show infantilize the big cats, even as they marvel at their strength. This striking scene of interspecies struggle is thus reduced to family drama. Reviewers commented both on Van Amberg's brutality and his bravado. In a chapter on 19th century lion tamers in exhibiting animals in 19th century Britain, Helen Cowie quotes a reviewer in the Preston Chronicle who wittily captures both sentiments. Quote, Van Amberg had one of his fingers bitten off Tuesday last at Falmouth by the lion. Let him beware his head. It was 1842. To those who protested his brutality, Van Amberg quoted yet another biblical passage, Genesis 1:26, that I discussed earlier. And God said, let us make man in our image after our likeness and let them have dominion, etc. Thus, he reinforced religious claims and courted popularity by developing a stage and road show in which he acted out scenes from the Bible dependent upon species difference as well as dominion. Nevertheless, many Victorians remained attentive to the complexities of interspecies entanglement with brute subjugation. An 1865 obituary in the magazine Flag of Our Union ignores the Bible and focuses on the relationship he sees in the flesh. Recalling that after a tiger attacked Van Amberg so fiercely he was left with protruding bowels, the reviewer adds, he tamed the animal finely and made him a great pet. These reviews suggest that the model of domination never fully explains the relationships that bound these animal tamers and animals together, or solely draws spectators to the shows and to the painting. Reading against the grain of the Dominion plot, I find the decision to position spectators within the cage in the first example fascinating. We are invited to dissociate ourselves from the puny humans we see outside the cage. The monarch in this frame is the lion, powerful and beatific, perhaps a compliment to the queen. The light falls on the lazily snarling tiger and timid lamb, highlighting the fantasy of coexistence. One of the leopards watches the humans with a slightly bemused expression, mirroring the soldier's reciprocal gaze. In effect, despite the biblical allusions, this is the community of diverse species looking at a group of diverse spectators, bright faces and dark, old and young with some class variation. The physical force of the scene might lie in Van Amberg's arrogance, but the affective power of the scene relies on the pleasure in the fleeting, peaceable kingdom. Creeping doubt about the inviolability of human dominion seeps into a second painting from 1847, in which Landseer returns to Van Amberg and his big cats. Landseer titled this painting, Portrait of Mr. Van Amberg as he appeared with his animals at the London theaters, but the Duke of Wellington, who commissioned the painting, renamed it Dominion. The Duke of Wellington also placed it in a frame inscribed with verses from Genesis, asserting man's dominion. The Duke's painting was probably based on the same sketches Landseer used for the 1839 painting, but clearly Landseer's perspective on interspecies harmony had changed. Let's see here. In this new painting, sorry, I meant to just forward things. In this new painting, probably he's using, Landseer is using the same sketches from the 1839 painting, but clearly Landseer's perspective on interspecies harmony has changed. Here, we're kept clearly out of the cage. The focus in this painting is resolutely on species, hierarchies, and human domination. We are now the only spectators, and we stand squarely outside the cage, looking through the bars. Van Amberg is standing, feet apart in a position of command in gladiator dress. He holds a snarling tiger at bay with a whip on one side of the cage as he commands two cowering lionesses and an angry lion with his hand and voice on the other side, so completely opposed to the majestic treatment of the lion in the earlier painting. Here, the whip defines the relationship. The muted, melancholy light falls only on the human figure, and the animals all face away from him. And I'll put the two side by side, though you can't see it quite as well. Louise Lippincott and Andreas Blum, authors of the catalog for the exhibit Fierce Friends, argue that Van Amberg's staying hand in the first painting, which manages the tension in the faces of the lion and leopard and the lamb's nervousness, asserts man's moral authority and superiority, whereas the later portrait abandons that subtlety and focuses on physical power of the natural world. Landseer understood his military patron, the Duke, well. Taken together, the paintings are a powerful reminder that evolution, including the mutation of means, has little to do with progress. Even as Darwin was anxiously contemplating evidence of deep connections among species, Landseer was distancing himself from human-animal intimacies with wild creatures, distancing the figures in the cage from one another, and literally barring spectators from wild animals. Or is the dim lighting, the vulnerability of the gladiator, the abjectness of the animals, and the tawdry refuse of departed spectators at the bottom of the frame a sign of Landseer's disillusion with brute dominion? Once again, human-animal relationships have been founded on dominion and domination, however gentle. The paintings and periodical fascination with Van Amberg must surely have been a shaping force later in the century in what one could almost call animal porn scenes in the adventure novels of Africa and India, like Rider Haggard's She, an Adventure Novel, 1886-87. In many memoirs of missionaries and in empire adventure novels, one of the set scenes in what might more precisely be called an animal version of snuff porn is scenes like this one. In these scenes, human violence is subsumed into terrifying but natural violence as the condition of species contact. In She, the characters take an exhausting, dangerous river trip into the heart of Africa. One evening, the impetuous, young, blonde, virile, and appropriately named Leo shoots a bullet into a lioness's open mouth as she and her mate drink from the river's edge. She drops dead, but just as we're recoiling from that shooting, her enraged mate is attacked by a crocodile, quote. There was a rush and disturbance of the water, such as one sees in a pond in England when a pike takes a little fish, only 1,000 times fiercer and larger, and suddenly the lion gave a most terrific snarling roar and sprang forward onto the bank, dragging something black with him. The crocodile drags the lion into the water by the hind leg. The lion latches on to the crocodile's throat. A grisly description of interspecies gore follows. Holly, the Cambridge Don and narrator of the novel, concludes, then all of a sudden the end came. The lion's head fell forward on the crocodile's back, and with an awful groan, he died. And the crocodile, after standing for a minute motionless, slowly rolled over onto his side, his jaws still fixed in the carcass of the lion, which, we found afterwards, he had bitten almost in halves. This duel to the death was a wonderful, and this is the character, not me. This duel to the death was a wonderful and shocking sight, and one that I suppose few men have seen, and thus it ended. In this interspecies sleight of hand, missionaries, novelists, and lion tamers invoke the natural order, the survival of the fittest, to justify but also to gentle their own interspecies violence as hunters, often killing animals for no reason. If only inadvertently, the conclusion of the battle undermines the claim by killing both species of animals. In both paintings, the web of action, image, animal, and viewers comprise a signifying system that nervously circle socially approved barriers to interspecies understanding. But Victorian responses to interspecies art and performance provides nuanced, multidimensional, and bidirectional evidence of unexpected affect among members of the animal kingdom, including humans. Interpreting that evidence, where we can find it, may help us to see how what John Plotz has described as the emotional social networks of communication that would soon shape the public's perception to evolutionary theories of Darwin and his scientific colleagues that positioned us, humans, as animals. I began this essay to wind toward a conclusion with one interspecies cosmology and with the strange interspecies alliances caused by the terrific and traumatic effects of a tsunami. So it seems fitting to close by fast forwarding to our own interspecies responses, which include our own responses to both. The research I'm doing on interspecies attachment is driven by my desire to understand why the Victorians and my own kind long to connect with other species, even those we kill directly or destroy by ruining their environments. I've been focusing on some of the graver consequences of that desire. To conclude, I want to take another leap in time to the present. I suspect that today, part of our response to strange interspecies attachments among wild animals is an act of mourning. It seems no accident that in current memes, the beings who form deep attachments across the species divide, like Owen and Measy, are orphans and environmental refugees. Very quickly, I want to close with examples of emerging ways people in the 21st century are attempting interspecies attachment, in addition to the intensification of the meme on social media everywhere, and as I noticed, have repeatedly on book covers in airports across America. In the interest of time and an honest admission that I'd rather think with you all about our own moment than to spend too much time on my early musings, I will offer you a list rather than an argument by way of conclusion. The first category I see frequently is what I call literary hybridity. For the most part, the scenes in art and fiction I've discussed relish the violence of interspecies interaction. But another set of images reminds us of the longing to become other species, to interspecies, rather than merely to interact. Perhaps this is another reason Landseer's first painting positions viewers in the cage. Two light-hearted images capture that impulse, also Victorian paintings. The first is the painting titled A Monster from 1866 by another popular animal artist admired by Queen Victoria, Charles Burton Barber. The second is a photo advertisement featuring Eliza Blasina, and this is for Kim, from the play The Devil's Auction or The Golden Branch. This was a performance called A Spectacle, a proto-drama in 4 acts, and a drama about which nobody cares because the point of interest is first the dancing, next the dancers, and last the scenery. Says it pretty. This first appeared in 1887. The review appeared in 1887. As we face the next major extinction of species, our longing to understand animal interiority has only intensified. One of the key early texts of animal studies was American philosopher Thomas Nagel's well-known article, What Is It Like to Be a Bat, from 1974, arguing against consciousness as organic physical processes. Nagel famously asserted that, quote, an organism has conscious mental states if and only if there is something that it is like to be that organism, something that it is like for the organism to be itself. You may have read reviews a few years ago of these two books that appeared simultaneously in 2016, in which humans defy the limitations that Nagel sees, pressing beyond the desire to merely form attachments with other species. The authors of these two books long to escape the limitations of their human species by becoming the other. Charles Foster, a veterinarian lawyer, journalist, and lecturer in medical ethics, spent 6 weeks living first like a badger and then like a fox. In his book, Being a Beast, he details burrowing, eating worms, and welcoming his young son into the experiment. Almost simultaneously, Thomas Thwaites' Goat Man, How I Took a Holiday from Being Human, was published by Princeton Architectural Press. Both men seek what the New Yorker reviewer Joshua Rothman calls, quote, the vivid openness of animality. These literal attempts to live as and with other species are compelling, quixotic, and ultimately unfulfilling. I couldn't help but think of H.G. Wells' horrific 1896 novel, The Island of Dr. Moreau, in which the mad vivisector carves non-human animals into humans. Neither knives nor prostheses can really deliver species reassignment. The second category that I've found really interesting is imagined hybridity. Relying on the imagination rather than embodiment, fiction writers have thrown themselves into the task of species synthesis through imaginative experiments that ultimately seem more satisfying. Ivan Krillkamp, who has a marvelous book from the University of Chicago Press on animals, Victorian animal studies, wrote about such novels in a New Yorker piece, Can Fiction Show Us How Animals Think, from 2015. Ivan was especially interested in one elephant novel titled The Tusk That Did the Damage by Tanya James. My own favorite is Barbara Gowdy's 1999 novel, Whitebone. In both cases, the authors actively researched elephants and their culture. James threads together multiple points of view, one of which is that of a dangerous male elephant. The point of view of Gowdy's novel is exclusively located in animal consciousness. In the rare appearances of humans, they are silhouettes of threat. The novel blends realistic details about elephants and impressionistic mystical fantasies of elephant psychology, a kind of collective thought process that exists both individually and as a herd collective. When other species enter the novel, like hyenas and humans, their words and thoughts are filtered through the elephants, who seem capable of hearing or absorbing the state of being and thought of other species. The author spent months at an elephant sanctuary before writing the novel, and her observations not only in elephant behavior, but also in her anticipation of trauma elephants suffer when separated from others in herds. Her book could be the elephant unconscious of researcher Gay Bradshaw's Elephants on the Edge. What makes this novel so valuable to animal studies is its flight from human landscapes and the aesthetic demands of realistic fiction. While the thousands of photographs of animal friends continue their circulation and sentimental consumption, Whitebone reorganizes the universe. And there are also film experiments like Winged Migration that I will skip over because thanks to time, I want to get to it. As my preference for imaginative versus literal cross-species hybridity suggests, ironically, the more distant we are from other species, the better we may understand them and serve them. Paradoxically, my third and final category of 21st century interspecies attachments focus on species simulacra. And these robotic reproductions don't really pretend to be real or even highly realistic. This is where we return to tsunamis. The success of robotic animals can be seen as a kind of Pyrrhic victory in the struggle among species. Pero is in fact an MCR, a mental commitment robot, designed to promote improvement in 3 specific areas: psychological, physiological, and social effects. each measured by such observable evidence as vital signs and the initiation of communication with inpatients and caregivers. Made in the form of a baby seal with enormous eyes and moving eyelashes, Paros were used extensively after the tsunami in Japan in retirement communities to provide comfort, especially to people with dementia and Alzheimer's who were devastated by lost homes, families, and caretakers. No doubt, marketers spent hours debating the species Pero should simulate. The question is, why did Pero need to be any species other than human? Pero embodies, if we can use that word, many of the concerns about human alienation from other humans that Sherry Turkle raises in her book, Together Alone. But it also questions whether interspecies attachments require reciprocity. Is genuine acknowledgement of the affective and physical needs of a non-human animal necessary to actualize bonds between humans and other species? As numerous studies have shown, Pero and other non-human companions do in fact provide pleasure and significant improvement in the quality of many people's lives. These robots require maintenance, but impose no daily feeding, bodily function, smells, soiling, and grooming. They are complicated animated dolls with whom many of us have also had complicated animated relationships. They are the toy versions of species we buy at zoos rather than the living animals we keep in captivity, in part to satisfy our craving for proximity to other species. They provide the safety to other species that the distance of fiction and webcams can also provide. What they do not require is domination. In a world where our deep longing for other species so easily leads to their annihilation, is this, the attached detachment to species, what we've come to? Is this virtual animal presence all we really want? Or is it all we really deserve? Thank you. See you soon.